So I'll try and be quick as possible because we've run through quite a lot of time. I just wanted to finish by trying to frame a few challenges. It's probably going to cover some of the stuff that's already been covered, but I thought it'd be really good to just look at a couple of really specific things that you could maybe pick up and look at yourselves. That doesn't mean you have to, but I thought it'd be nice just to try and do a little bit of sort of challenge framing, really. This is probably stating the bleeding obvious. This is from a piece that Tantek wrote about web intent. So he tends to use the word web actions because he thinks actually it describes it a little bit better. But I think it's really good for today is when we're dealing with these types of technologies, as they're evolving, it's quite hard to get yourself, well, it's quite easy to get involved in dealing with the technology and being constrained by the way that it's being presented at this particular time. And at least for me, I have to continually remind myself that it is actually about the user experience. If we don't get actually this to work in terms of being positive for the user, stuff that they actually want to do, rather than things that we think they want to do in terms of like privacy or this whole idea of distributed social web, you know, those are goals that maybe I have as a person, but not what the users want. So I think it's good just to keep this in your forefront. And also as well, one of the things that when I was talking to Tantek about this was, he was saying, you know, if we want to look at doing stuff, we should look at how we're going to take it from the idea it is at the moment and really concentrate on the adoption. How are you going to move it from here to being a widely adopted thing? So the three bits that I'm going to look at, they're not in any specific order, but they're all really about adoption. So the first one's social proof, which is actually what we've been talking about through, you know, a lot of the stuff that came up earlier is this. So I mean, in terms of persuasive design, sort of one of the 6 elements of persuasive design is the social proof. And it's becoming really predominant now. Over a year ago when we started looking at this, it wasn't so much, but you know, Google Plus is now doing all this sort of stuff. We're getting a lot more of the recommendation stuff going on, and obviously all the accounts which have been around for a while. And there are all sorts of different methodologies of engaging people and getting them to get involved because of what other people have done, whether that be just generalistically or people within their own networks. And obviously the more sophisticated ones like Google now and Facebook are dealing with just what people have done within your network. Some of the messaging's done like that. And if we move over to say, if we're just talking about the share for the moment, you know, because obviously there's a lot of other things like the pick and stuff which are really fascinating, but if we talk about the biggest use case, which is definitely share as it stands at the moment, there are billions of interactions that go on related to sharing, liking, etc. If we then replace it with some sort of share button, let's say we came up with a generic one, and I've just put this one here with the icon and share on it, we're losing a lot of this social proof stuff that's going on at the top. So it's quite interesting. So we've gained a lot here in terms of when you click on this, you get to decide what service you want to use. It takes away all of this clutter because this is actually off a screenshot of the ReadWrite website. So and it's even messier than this. So you get rid of all the NASCAR problem, all this clutter, but then you end up with this bit where we've lost the social proof. So to the publishers, we've lost this great big thing, and also to the users as well, because they actually like sometimes to see the icons, and they trust brands, and so people trust brands and they engage with brands, less so generic buttons like this. So how do we take the best of this and the best of this and bring them together? It's quite a challenge. So I was just thinking about it when I was thinking maybe what would be a solution. So I just quickly went with this one. If we wanted to do the count and we wanted to put the brand in it, maybe we could actually do something like this that just quickly rotates itself backwards and forwards and does that. One possible solution. I'm not saying it's right, but it's sort of like those types of things, looking at how we can engage the social proof and some of the branding back into here without actually losing, still having the share button that you can choose and stuff like that. I think that's a really interesting problem to engage on. So that's the sort of first one. As well as that, quite often, this is in our company, we actually provide these buttons and we've styled them up. And again, depending on where you are, we found that sometimes on some pages people go for the tall ones, mainly with accounts, mainly the highly trafficked ones. But if we've got pages that are not very highly trafficked or they don't have a social element into it, they're unlikely to be shared and stuff, we tend to go for the smaller ones or even the icons and stuff. So there's different levels and different usages. So it's not just that you'd have one, but you have different places where you want to do different things. At least that's what we found when we've deployed these types of buttons. So social proof. Is losing social proof an issue? That's a big question, actually. Is it? I don't know how it's, from some of the some of the stats that we were hearing earlier, possibly, yes, it is a big issue. The conversion rates are pretty good for it. Is it just share? Is that type of using these counts and all of that, is it just related to share, or does it going to affect other types of things where we've got other services and buttons? Do we need to think about it for that? Can we provide social proof for intent? So some of the ideas I just showed you. And what sort of patterns would work? So I think those are the types of questions around that. Quickly move on. So offering experience for publishers, I think this is a really big one. So obviously this is the site that's up at the moment, and hopefully I'm not going to upset Paul by saying it looks like what it is. It's a site for telling developers about early spec work, and that's what's going on at the moment. If you go over to something like Twitter, and you go over to if I was to put Twitter, if I was an author and I was to put a Twitter button onto a page, this is the first page I come to. It immediately sort of grabs me, extends the reach of your audience. But the big one is this page here. It's really simple to use. You come in, you go, okay, what type of button it is, I want, click it there. What's the style? I get a couple of little options down here. It shows me a preview of what it's like, and then just gives me a piece of code that I copy and I paste into my site. It can take literally 2 or 3 minutes to do. And this is a really important thing. If we're going to talk about adoption, how do we provide this type of experience for something that's open in the sense that we're doing it? Because really, if we can't provide easy executions and methodology where people can do this sort of thing, then they're going to I have to read through all those pages, and then I've got to understand it all, and then finally I can sort of put some code together myself from a couple of examples. No, you want something where you can copy and paste it. So I think there has to be some concentration on the experience for people who are going to put these into their sites. I mean, it's the same for Facebook or AdThis. All of those sites have these really nice systems. So that's another sort of challenge, I think. And then the last one is progressive enhancement to sort of aid adoption. So if we go back to look at this is that page that I took the screenshot from earlier. This is it in total. It's at the footer. You can see it. So this publisher's put up here. They're actually using the AdThis service, but they're also using some of the other icons and stuff like that. You can see there. Let's say that Google get Web Intents out on Chrome. But we have to wait for another 12 months or 18 months before the other browsers follow suit, and if that's what happens. But we want to get the adoption going. We can't just say to a publisher, actually take all this out and put your share button here, because that's not Web Intents share. That's just not going to happen. So we have to have some sort of switching mechanism, maybe. So it says, okay, if it's available, then present that button. I mean, how do we actually do that? So, I mean, in this case, I just mocked up some possible sort of buttons if they were to go like that. So, if we took all the stuff that's going on here and reduced it down, like share, bookmark, subscribe, print, and email. Well, maybe that if you've got to also do that about is the support there? What about if the user has set up preferences for share and bookmark? They've got services for that, but they haven't got one set up for subscribe. How do we deal with that? So at the moment, there's some discussion about what Paul's implemented is that if you clicked on this and if they haven't already registered a service, that it would possibly put a pop-up that showed you the other services that are available on the web at the moment. Personally, I think that it would be much better if we could do a test and see if it was actually available. I know there's some security issues with this, but it would be actually, when we're going to put these buttons in, have they got something that already does this for us? Because if we haven't, and we press that up and it just puts the page up there, it's a little bit of a cul-de-sac, and maybe that's not a good user experience. So there's a whole issue about how we can build buttons and provide the code for the authors in really simple forms that actually progressively enhances what they've already got and slowly over time switches them over to using these systems. Because if we want to get fast adoption of these ideas, it's those types of things which will aid adoption. So social proof, how do we set up that sort of experience for the authors, and how do we build things that allow for progressive enhancement in terms of slowly integrating this stuff into the web. So those are the three things I'm personally really interested in. I think they're quite complex problems, all of them. Some of it's a little bit of technical stuff, but a lot of it is actually about UX and design. So I thought I'd put them forward for you guys, and maybe it's something you'd like to look at.
Very cool.
What was it? Yeah.
So, I guess we've got time for like a couple of questions before we go around and introduce ourselves.
I'm a little bit confused how we start on maybe you're going to cover that in a bit, what we do.
As in literally what we're going to do next.
Yeah, kind of, yeah, because it's like there's so much we could focus on.
Yeah.
And how we pick.
So
we're not going to be able to cover it all.
Should I just go through the process then?
Yeah.
Sorry, I've jumped ahead.
Yeah. Fine.
We're going to do this. We're going to do the process anyway.
Yeah.
In a while.
Yeah. Do you want to ask questions first? And then
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So I want to say that I think you really hit it spot on. It's the progressiveness, not breaking sites, but chicken and egg. How do you get people to use it? How do you get publishers and clients and services to add it? If it's going to break the existing model, that is the biggest problem, in my mind, to solve. You have to have adoption, or else, obviously, there's nothing.
It is quite an interesting and thorny issue in terms of how you do that. But I think all of those three are all slightly wrapped up together, and that's the reason why I sort of presented them. But they are distinct problems as well. If you wanted to look at one, you would. But I think they all sort of come together because the whole thing about social proof in branding relates then back to publishers' uptake and stuff like that.
I got a quick question. How much of this stuff do you think belongs in the page, and how much do you think belongs in the browser itself?
Well, I think obviously the bits we were just looking at, the buttons and stuff like that, are already in the page, and where we use buttons, icons, it could actually be a hyperlink as well. But I've always put them up as buttons because that feels right, because that seems the conventions that are ongoing at the moment. That is the domain of the people who own the pages. So that's the domain of the publishers, and you have.
But when I bookmark something, I use my browser to do that.
Yeah.
At the moment. And it could be that like we get rid of the browser just like throws away the bookmarking thing and just has a button that integrates with whatever service you use for bookmarking instead.
So the stuff that
we
Paul
talked about bookmarklets as well, which sort of sits in the middle.
Yeah.
It's in the browser Chrome, but it's not really part of the browser as such.
Yeah. I mean, bookmarklets are great for a specific audience, aren't they? There's a bit like extensions. There's only a certain group of people you have uptake in that. And so, there are other audiences that wouldn't understand what a bookmarklet was or even an extension. And
they might like the functionality it provides, though. So, for example, Tumblr's bookmarklet is fantastic because it just parses the page for you. And it makes life really easy for doing the different types of way of sharing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a great service to provide to people, but it's really opaque to people at the moment.
Yeah, and that's why you very rarely see Tumblr buttons. I had to look round to try and find one. They do exist apparently, but I couldn't find any. But I think they both live together. They're two different ecosystems, and one relates to the whole sort of publisher element in terms of a lot of traditional publishers like B2B newspapers and stuff like that heavily use these types of services, and they probably want the branding elements in there as well, like the fact that it's there. They're not going to rely on the fact that you've got an extension or a bookmark in place. So the two things need to be developed and developed separately and properly for slightly different use cases and different groups of audiences as well. Well, that's my take anyway.
How much of this have you kind of got a feel for the answers for already?
I think, personally, I think that the looking at the bit we looked at the middle about doing the experience bit for the authors, for them to come and find somewhere and easily understand something and just do a checkbox and copy some code. I think that's really important. If we don't get that piece done at some point along the road, it's just not going to get the uptake. It makes things too painful for people. Not really
so that's something that already needs to happen. It needs to happen and look a bit like that, and we just need someone to get on and do it.
And have a look at it and do it, I mean, it's an interesting piece because obviously whether it fits completely in the intents.org site or where it lives, or because it's not owned like the Twitter's API's owned. But I think you were interested in doing that.
I actually built a widgeting system in the original, before I exported it across App Engine. I built a widgeting system which the theory was that you can just take a snippet of code and say, well, I've got a share button now. And then it'll do things like track whether you've shared it or not, because like state management sometimes I thought was kind of important. You don't want to keep resharing the same articles each time. I actually want that, I think we all want that embedded in the actual inside the intent page. So you go to pick, and it gives you a little thing that says, "Oh, I'm going to do the pick," and just how you do it, and all that type of stuff. So I'm super keen for that. I'm open for any help as well, because I'm not the best.
Is there a sequence of events to some of these activities that needs to happen? Like, you can't necessarily design that until somebody's come to a conclusion about where it sits in the browser.
I don't think so. I think maybe that, some of the stuff related to if you were going to build a widget would have to relate to what choices you're going to have, which sort of relates a little bit to, are we going to do things with counts on them or not with counts on, or is it just going to be a plain button? And so maybe if I was honest, I'd say that's a little bit earlier, and actually it's a proper UX problem, the bit about branding and also about social proof and how much people really need to see a brand to interact with something or not, or whether they can actually just look at it as itself. The language, the verbs, the iconography, all of that stuff is really classic design stuff, and that's not sorted yet. We're all using very simple buttons and apologising for them when we're showing the demos, and I think that says something about where we're at with that.
Glenn, does microformats fit into this at all? I mean, some of what microformats used to offer, I don't know if it's becoming a dead end or not, but some of it used to offer imply some verbs. When you're marking something up as an event, then there's an implied action that you might want to add it to your calendar. I don't know if that fits into this ecosystem or Web Intents replaces that.
I don't think it replaces it. I think it can kind of complement it in the sense that there was one of the things I was talking on the train on the way down was whether we can do things like, I don't know whether it's like Microsoft slices things, but if you detect a tag on the page or like a H card on the page, can we not actually do something that's consistent inside the browser that says, actually, what do you want to do with this contact? We've got the contacts, right? We've got things that we can do with it, right?
The thing. If you're talking about like the syntax and the sort of grammar of it, then microformats express nouns and these express verbs. So what it is making explicit the implicit actions that are associated with those nouns.
Yeah, exactly.
It was one of the interesting things about the whole microformats movement was that the tooling in terms of discovery of the data. So the microformats, obviously, it's like all coded into the HTML. So if you've got an event, it's also hidden behind that. So the machines can pick it up. So a number of people, including myself, built things like browser extensions that came up at the top and showed you that there was a microformat there and allowed you to do things like export it to your calendar and stuff like that. They sort of worked, but not enough people downloaded them. Then we did some stuff where, at least I did and a couple of other people did some experiments where we injected buttons over the top of where the event was, and people who owned the pages hated that, so they didn't work at all either. Actually what we found was with microformats, one of the things with microformats was actually the discovery mechanisms were the problems. Well, I don't think Web Intents has that, because actually by definition it's about that sort of thing anyway. So there is some crossover and maybe a little bit to be learnt from microformats. I've done some stuff already where I'm pulling data from pages and pulling it across.
From an idiot's point of view, I totally get what you mean. Like these are the microformats is the stuff you can do things to, and these are the tools to do their stuff.
Yeah.
And
I think. Sorry.
Go ahead.
One of the things that we're really looking into, it's been lower priority, but is how much of the browser becomes involved with discovering these formats and showing to the user, and this is a problem that I think is not solved. Of course, we can right-click on an image and very easily put an edit little menu that shows you your things you can edit with, or just clicking edit brings up the picker. But I don't think that's the best way to expose that you can perform actions on the pages. But the other side of that is you can't overlay things on the page because that annoys the hell out of the author.
Well, I think we've been in a little bit of a standoff position for a while, where which you guys referred to earlier, which is that we've had such a distinctness between the content that's in a page and the Chrome that surrounds it, and actually we're at a stage now where I feel, or get the feeling from some of the from the browser vendors, that they're more willing to consider blending this experience together, so that the interactions from the page can be in one way or another displayed within the browser, which is obviously what Web Intents is about and what you guys did with F1 and stuff like that. So it's really nice that some of the problems that we had with microformats in terms of building extensions and trying to do those things were actually we were actually stuck at the point where we couldn't really change the browser. It's actually, once it gets into the agent that people are using, then it becomes much more familiar, they're more happy with it, they can see it's part of their experience, and it'll work a lot better.
It seems like a really natural fit. I mean, in terms of things, like just from a purely visual design point of view, just reducing visual noise to have that one control consistently in your browser. I mean, I've got like a +1 button that's like a Chrome extension, and I use it because it's so fast just to click it and you don't have to do anything other than that one click. Actually, it's not shared, it's just bookmarking, but that's the confusion, right? Is it sharing or bookmarking? And I really like the fact that it's consistent, but I wish that the same little add-on would actually remove some of those things from the page and hide any other +1 buttons, because I don't need them now.
The problem is the content publishers, isn't it? Because the users want this. They want, I've got content on a page, show it to me the way I want it shown, fragment it up the way I want it, don't force it into one big HTML page altogether, and I don't really give a toss. And the software vendors and everything want, because there's such an opportunity to do that and go, this is just a piece of information, you can display it however and wherever you want. It's only the content publishers who hold the purse strings who have a problem with it, because they still want the graphical control, they still want the tracking.
I think the tracking is the main thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're providing the content. Well, less and less so. Now more and more we're providing and sharing the content. So they're providing the frameworks through which we mediate the content. But
I think as well, though, the interesting bit about this, and you need to keep in the back of your head, is that or at least what I feel is that the sharing thing that's gone on, and that it's so mature now, and the way all of the stuff around sharing is slightly different to some of the other stuff that we've been talking about with, like, the PIC and stuff like that, which is more application to application. And I think we have a different set of problems in relation to publishers and sharing than we do with all the other types of intents, because they're a lot more easier, and I think the buy-in will become a lot quicker with those and stuff. So it's a fantastic problem, and it's one that needs to be sorted, but it's not everything. It's not going to affect the whole idea. So even if there's a bit of I don't know what the word was, a resistance from the publishers in relation to the sharing, that doesn't mean that this whole idea is defunct in any way, because there's some fantastic, interesting things that can be done with the whole PIC, edit, save, and all the other types of things which allowed more complex services to be integrated together.
It's that sharing functionality which is going to be the make or break, though, isn't it? It's going to say whether this gets adopted or not.
Yeah, that would bring wide adoption if we could break that one.
Is that not an argument for saying the other things are a Trojan horse? They're a way in.
Yeah, it's true.
Possibly.
So go for the stuff that isn't particularly well embedded as a way into sharing.
I think the ImageMaker demo that we do is a perfect example of how we can get adoption. Like, I do definitely agree the sharing problem is separate. So if you're, a small developing house and you don't have the ability to do image editing, the fact that you can work with other apps, integrate with other apps, is like a huge win. That's 10 people you don't need, etc. And I don't think they'll have as much concern about putting a button that just says edit, like you would in your own application, but you just don't provide the functionality yourself. And it is completely different from sharing. So I definitely agree it's a different problem.
I think we should sort of carry on this discussion in the format of a kind of round the room, kind of introducing ourselves.